It's time to start. But before we get started, I have a few quick announcements. So, there will gonna be midterm two on June 12th, which is like this Friday, and the exam will gonna cover everything from monetary policies through equilibrium, which we're gonna cover this Wednesday. So make sure you're reviewing all of those chapters together and get ready. And second one is like homework three is due on June 10th, which is this Wednesday, I guess. This homework covers three chapters as well, so don't wait until the last minute because it could be a little longer than like previous one. Um, and finally, your midterm scores have already been posted last Friday. If you have any questions about your score or if you have any concerns about this course, like feel free to like reach out to me, like or send me an email. Like I'm happy to be with you. So, yeah, up until now, like we talked about like GDP, inflation, mostly like macro part. We moved into micro part, right? So today we're gonna talk about like one of the most important concepts in all of economics, which is demand and supply. Honestly, like if you understand supply and demand very well, like huge amount of like economics starts to making sense. So yeah, we're gonna try to learn about it today. So honestly, like today's topic is like one of the most important topics, as I said. So if someone asks you about like what do economists like actually study, like probably we're gonna talk about, like supply and demand. And that will gonna be the first thing people gonna think of, like why did ad prices increase? Like why some concerts tickets are expensive. Why do house costs like more in some cities than others, like something like that. So I really hope like by the end of today, like you will understand like why economists like draw this type of like curves and what they actually try to like represent. We're gonna start with like demand. So I always like tell students like that demand is like really about like human behavior. So a demand curve is like not just a line on the graph, like it's describing like choices people make. And you are the subject of demand curves. So like think about like gasoline. Like suppose like gasoline costs like $5 per gallon. Maybe you only want to like buy 1 gallon because it is expensive. And what if like price drops maybe to $4? You might buy like 2 gallons, like a little bit more. And at $3, maybe you could buy 3 gallons. Like, like this type of like stuff like going on. So like notice what's happening, like as the price gets lower, the amount you're willing to buy gets higher. That's exactly what an individual demand curve represents. So an individual demand curve like shows like how much one person is willing and also able to buy at different prices. So why is it like even matter, right? Companies like cares a lot about this. Like imagine you're running like farms, like Starbucks, Amazon, or Netflix, like something like that. You want to know, like, if I lower my price, like how much more will people buy? So understanding like demand helps like films making, like pricing decisions. So like here we need to know like the key relationship in between this, which is like really simple. So lower the price, like the higher the quantity demanded. And opposite, like, like if there is like higher price, there will gonna be like lower quantity demanded. Now we want to talk about like some important like phrase economists like love using, which is like ceteris paribus. It sounds like a little fancy, right? So because it is Latin, but the idea is like actually really simple. So it means holding other things constant. So whenever we draw a demand curve, we're gonna like have like same thing like on supply curve as well, but we will gonna assume like everything else stays the same. And why do we need like, like this assumption? Like that is because, like a lot of things influence your buying decisions. Like for example, your income will gonna be matter, your preferences matter, the maybe the weather might be matter as well. Your expectations about future will gonna be matter as well, like some sort of this. So let me give you an example. Like maybe gasoline is like $3 today. And just suppose you got like 10,000 bonus from your work, then what will gonna happen? Like you might buy more gas even though like the price didn't change, right? It's also possible. That's not the effect of the price itself. That's the effect of like income. So when economies like draw a demand curve, we temporarily like hold all those like other factors constant and like try to like focus only on price itself. And this will gonna lead us to the like low of demand. So like the low of demand says when the price falls, like the quantity demanded will gonna rise, and when the price rises, like the quantity demanded will gonna fall. This is like why demand curves like slope downward. And honestly, like this matches with common sense as well. So for example, like if your favorite what we can say, if your favorite restaurants like suddenly cuts the like prices of menu in half, yeah, let's say it, then most people would eat there like more than ever, right? If like concert tickets like double in price, maybe like fewer people will gonna buy them, right? That is like what exactly says like the law of demand in action. Then like how do we make good buying decisions, right? So like these slides help explain why demand curves like slope downwards and then like how buyers make decisions. Like let's think like economists. Like suppose I ask, like how many slices of like pizza should I eat? Like let's make it a simple, right? Economics, we're gonna say don't answer that all at once, we break it down into smaller decisions, which is marginal. So, like, should I eat one more slice, then another? And this is like called like marginal thinking. Like we talked about it like last class. So we compare the benefit of like one more units with its cost, right? So the cost benefit principle, we're gonna say buy one more unit if the benefit exceeds the cost. Then now, like we're gonna like apply opportunity cost principle, which we're gonna say like compare the choice with the next best alternative. Now this all leads to like buyer's rules. So in one sentence, like buy more if marginal benefit is greater than equal to price. So keep buying until price is equal to marginal benefit. And that is because like that's where you're maximizing your economic surplus. We're gonna talk about this like maybe after the midterm too, but yeah. So now thinking about like pizza again. Like the first slice we're gonna taste like really amazing. Like it will be so good, right? And the second slice we're gonna be like maybe still great, but like not as good as like the first slice. Then third slice we're gonna be okay, then maybe think about like six slides. Like it would be like a little bit like too much, right? So maybe you're regretting like your life choices like sometime at some point. And economists like call this as diminishing, like marginal benefit. So each additional units will gonna give less satisfaction than the previous one. Because like, like margin benefit first as like quantity increases and your willingness to pay will gonna fall as well. So that is the reason the demand curve slopes like downward as well. And this is like one of the like most important ideas in consumer behavior. So until now, like we talked about like one person's demand, but market contains like really many people, like right? A lot of people will gonna like, be in the market. So a market demand curve like combines like everyone's like demand together. Like I brought Siri and Alexa as the example. So like think about like Siri and Alexa in our example, like here there. So like at certain price, like Siri might buy 2 units, but Alexa might buy, like 3 units. Like for example, like if you see the like second row of it, if the gasoline price is at like $4, it is like different, right? So like the market demand is like simply the total, like 2 plus like 3 equals to 5. And there might be like huge amount of like individual people. So like the market will gonna like sum up like all of them. So, like we have like millions of like customers, like so like they're just like simply the sum of like all individual demand curves. And that's why we call it as like market demand. And as everyone has like downward like slopes individual demand curve, so like the whole market demand will gonna still have like, like downward slopes as well. It makes sense because like if like price falls, like more people buy and existing buyers will gonna buy more as well. So like total market quantity demand it rises as well. So you gotta remember that, individual demand will gonna be equal to like one person's buying behavior and market demand is as a whole, which means that everyone's like buying behavior added together. Now we're gonna switch slides. Instead of like thinking like buyers, let's think like sellers. You know, name we can name any sellers, like for example, like Amazon, Target, Netflix, McDonald's, like whatever, right? But here's something really interesting. You can be also seller too. Maybe you sell like old textbooks online. Maybe you sell, like handmade crafts, or maybe you tutor students. So whenever you sell something, you're participating in supply. So an individual supply curve shows like, how much one seller, like single individual seller, is willing to sell at different prices. So now let's look at the numbers over there. So we're in a like same market, gasoline market. So at $1 per gallon, maybe a seller supplies like 10 million gallons. And maybe if the price like goes up to like $2, they might supply a little bit more, right? They want to like make it like revenue. So they supply, like 50 million. Like at $5, they supply like 30 millions. Like, so we noticed the pattern again. So like higher price means like higher quantity supplied because, like selling becomes like more profitable. So like the higher the price, the stronger the incentive like to produce and sell. Just same as, like demand had a law, supply has one too. So again, we're holding other things constant. That's our ceteris paribus assumption. From this, we're gonna draw the like law of supply, which says when the price rises, quantity supplied rises. And on the other hand, when price falls, like quantity supplied will gonna fall as well. So like let's think about it from business perspective. So, like suppose we're running a coffee shop and suppose like coffee sells for $1 per cup. You might not want to like open a coffee shop because like it is too cheap. But now suppose like coffee sells for like $20 per a cup. then like suddenly a lot of people will gonna wanna enter that business as well, right? Because like higher price, like we're gonna create stronger incentive like to produce because it will gonna make, like revenues. That is why supply curves like slope upward. Like remember that demand slope were going downward, right? And supply slopes will gonna be like opposite, which will gonna be go upward. So those two curves are eventually going to meet, and that's where equilibrium comes in. We're gonna talk about it like next class a little bit more deeper. So before we continue on supply part, we need to talk about like a special type of like market, which is a perfectly competitive market. So economists like love starting here because it keeps like everything very simple. But yeah, let's talk about it first. So a perfectly competitive like market has like two main characteristics, which is first, all films in one industry we're gonna sell an identical goods, and second one, there are gonna be like many buyers and many sellers, and everyone is like small, so relative like to the like size of the market. Like no single seller is like large enough like to influence the market price, and that makes like films price takers. What does that mean, right? Like they don't choose the market price. So like they were gonna simply accept it. For example, like, like imagine a farmer selling wheat, like if the market price is like $6, then the farmer cannot suddenly like charge like $20 for their own product. Customers will gonna buy from someone else, but the farmers will gonna take the market price as a given. So like now real world markets are gonna usually not perfectly competitive. Like, even if like, just imagine about, like cell phone market. Apple will gonna sell like their unique products. Like Samsung will gonna sell like their own unique products as well. Like something like that. Many films have like, like some degree of like, like market power, but here we start with just like, like perfect competitive market because it gives us a strong foundation before we studying like more complicated markets. So then now let's think about like how sellers decide, like how much to produce. So for buyers, we use like marginal benefits, right? Now we're going to talk about like marginal cost. Like the rule is like used very simple. So produce like one more units. If the price is greater than or equal to the marginal cost, which is simple, right? You can see over there. Well, yeah. So why is that? So like because like that maximizes like the profit. So imagine that you're selling cookies, then like the first few cookies are cheap to make. But eventually you need more ingredients, like more labor, more time, like like some sort of like that inputs like over there, right? Then cost begins like to increasing, then the marginal cost of like producing one additional cookies could be rise. As long as the price is higher than the marginal cost, we can keep, producing that one. But once marginal cost exceeds the price, that is the point we cannot maximize like our profit. So we have a rule to stop over there. And that is like profit maximizing rule in competitive like markets. You know, that is the thing. And you'll see like this idea again in the future economics like courses because it is like one of like most important decision rules in economics. Like let's think about like why supply curves like slope upward at low prices. Like many films don't find productions very attractive. Profits are small, but maybe some films won't even enter the market, right? And as the price rises, like production becomes like more profitable. Films like increases their output. Some new films may enter as a result, like quantity supplied increases as well. So like that's exactly why supply curves like, slope upward. That's like kind of like similar. This is to buyers as well. Like buyers compare like price and margin benefits, but sellers will gonna compare price and marginal cost. So both groups are making decisions like using the same economic logic, but just comparing benefits and costs at the margin. Now we will gonna talk about, like market supply. So like just like market demand added together many buyers, market supply adds like all together many sellers. So suppose like shit supplies like 20 million gallons, Shell supplies like 20 million gallons. And add that by adding up together, they can add up to like market quantity. Just like notice that like and over there is like the number of like like suppliers in that market. So when the price rises, like current suppliers like we're gonna produce more, and new suppliers might enter the market as well. So when prices falls, like some firms will gonna be reduce production and some firms will gonna leave the market. And that's why market supply slopes like upward and higher prices will gonna encourage like more productions across the entire market. Which is like, like logics are very simple and like, like almost same across the like, supply and demand curve. So try to understand, which one is which. Lastly, like we're gonna talk about like shifts and like movements along the curves of like each curves. This is like the probably the most important distinction in today's like chapter. So, it is also one of the like most like common places per students will gonna lose points like on the quiz and also exams. So let's slow down and make sure we're comfortable with it. So there are two concepts in, like when you talk about like shifts and movements about the like demands and like supply curves. First one is movement along the curves. So a movement along the demand or supply curves happens because the price of that good changes. So that's the key phrase. Like the price of the goods itself changes, nothing else changes. For example, like like we were talking about like gasoline market, so we're gonna keep it at. So like suppose like gasoline costs like $5 per gallon, then like just suddenly like something happens and gasoline first to like $4 per gallon. People will gonna mo buy more gasolines, but demand change? No. So like demand curve like did not move, right? So like people like simply moved from one point in the existing demand curve to another point. Like for like you can see from the like first, graph over there. That is why we call it movement along the curve. Like there is like no shift in, like demand. So like the curve itself like stays exactly where it is. Just like move like the point we're gonna move along the like, this curve. Now let's compare this with the shift. So a shift happens like when something other than price of the goods changes, like entire curves will gonna move. So let's think about income. So suppose like everyone's income suddenly increases like for some reason, like people can afford more restaurant meals, people can buy more, right? So every possible price, people want to buy more. that's not the movement along the curve. The entire demand curve will gonna shift to the right. So demand has increased. So now let's do some examples together. Like suppose, Starbucks like lowers the price of the coffee. Is it like movement or a shift? Probably because like the price itself like changed it, so it should be a movement, right? Because like coffee on price like changed. Suppose like students like receive a large scholarship payments, then is it a movement or shift? It should be shift. So that is because like students' income will gonna be changed. So that is kind of like pushing the entire, curve to the outward. Let me give you one more. So like suppose like the population of like Raleigh suddenly doubles, then is it like movement or shift? It should be shift because there are more consumers in the market, and like that kind of like we're gonna pushes like demands curve like outward. So like these are kind of like the concepts of like like shifts and like movement. Now let's talk about the reasons, like what shifts demand and supply curves. We call it as like, shifters. Demand can shift because of like population changes, income changes, also prices of like substitutes or prices of like complements. You gotta be like very careful because like, like substitutes and like complements like are not the price of the goods itself. It is like price of like the other markets. So it is also talking about like prices, but like because like it is not about like their own price, their own goods price, like it is like kind of like considered as like outside of like their own price. Also like expectations about the future will gonna affect um consumer preferences, of course. Like for example, like if the price of like Pepsi rises, like some consumers may switch to Cokes, like something like that. Then what about like supplies? Like supply can shift because of like taxes, one of the biggest reasons, or input prices, also the reason. Maybe production costs, like technology, like like government regulations, number of like films itself, could be like like supply shifter. So for example, like if the government imposes like a new taxes on some goods, maybe production becomes like more expensive, then supply curve shifts to, leftward, right? So let's think of like other examples. Maybe like, we can talk about like technologies. What if like, like technologies improves like production efficiency, like, like something like that. Like there will gonna be like, like less, you know, cost to like make another like units. Probably like there will gonna be like more production, which will gonna pushes like supplies curves like to the outward right side. So like here is the shortcuts like I want you to remember. Whenever like you're confused, like ask yourself one questions, like like did the price of like the good itself change or not? If the answer is yes, it's a movement along the curve. If the answer is no, it's a shift. So like price change of its own goods within the market will gonna be the movement. Everything else will gonna be the shift. So if you can remember this one rule, like you'll avoid like most mistakes in this chapter and you'll be in great shape when you start talking about like equilibrium part. Because like equilibrium is really just like supply and demand curves like coming together, like combining and understanding like whether like those curves like moves or shift, like that is the key to understanding what happens to the price and quantities. So we're gonna help you a lot. So this is like the last thing I've prepared for today. But today we introduce like the foundations of like supply and demand. I want to like talk about, the big ideas were low of demand and supply. They're kind of like opposite. So like low of demand said, like, like lower the price will gonna lead to like higher quantity demanded. And on the other hand, the low of supply said, like higher price will gonna lead to higher quantity supplied. And we also talked about individual curves like versus like market curves. Mostly like individual curves like focuses like one person or like one films over there. But market curves like considered like like all individuals, all films in the market as a total, right? And also, like, buyers will gonna maximize their surplus when the price equals to marginal benefit, because they will gonna like think as like, buyers, they will gonna focus on like benefits. And sellers will gonna maximize their profit when the price equals to marginal cost. They focuses on the cost side, right? Um, Also, we talked about price changes cause movements along the curves and other factors causes, shifts of the curves. So next class, we're going to bring like supply and demand curve together and see how markets determine like equilibrium, price and quantities. So before the next class, make sure you're working on like homework 3 as I said, and try to like review these graphs carefully because understanding these curves will gonna make, equilibrium part much easier. Do we have any questions today? If we don't have any questions, we're gonna like sum up over here. I'll see you all this Wednesday. All right, thank you for coming. Bye.